Dr. Hansol Park was having a quiet morning on the International Space Station medical bay. She was checking medical supplies and writing reports when the emergency alert started beeping. The sound filled the white medical room, making her look up from her tablet. "Dr. Park, we have an urgent message from deep space," the station's AI announced. "It's marked as highest priority." Hansol pushed away from her desk, letting her chair float in the zero gravity. She had been the head trauma surgeon on the station for 3 years, but deep space emergencies were rare. Most of her work involved treating astronauts' normal space-related health issues. "Show me the message," she said, pushing herself toward the main screen. The message was strange. Instead of normal text, it showed moving crystal patterns. The translation software took a few seconds to convert it. When it did, Hansol's eyes grew wide. "This is an emergency call for help from the Nexus civilization," she read out loud. "Our people are dying. Our bodies are breaking apart. We need medical help immediately." The Nexus were a species humans had met just 5 years ago. They were peaceful traders who looked like walking crystals. Their bodies sparkled like diamonds and could change color based on their emotions. But now, according to the message, something was going very wrong. Hansol called an emergency meeting. Soon, doctors from Earth and other space stations were connected through video calls. Their faces filled multiple screens around her. "The Nexus are crystalline life forms," said Dr. Lee from Earth's Central Hospital. "None of us know how to treat them. Their biology is completely different from anything we've studied. We can't risk getting involved." Another doctor added, "We might make things worse." Hansol listened to their concerns. They were right. Treating crystal-based aliens would be extremely difficult. But as she looked at the message again, she remembered why she became a doctor. It wasn't just to help humans. It was to help anyone in need. "I'll go," she said suddenly, interrupting the ongoing discussion. The other doctors fell silent. "Hansol, this isn't like treating human patients," Dr. Lee warned. "We don't even know if our medical equipment will work on them." "I know," she replied, already making plans in her head. "But they asked for help. As doctors, we took an oath to help those in need. I don't think that oath should stop at human beings." She started pulling up information about the Nexus on her tablet. "They're dying. Their whole civilization is at risk. Even if we can't help, we have to try." The station commander, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Park? The journey to their world will take 2 weeks, even with our fastest ship." Hansol nodded. "I'm sure. I'll need to bring as much medical equipment as possible. And," she paused, thinking practically, "I'll need to bring lots of basic supplies too. Sometimes the simplest solutions work best in emergency medicine." The commander looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange for the medical transport ship to be ready in 6 hours. Take whatever you need." Hansol spent the next few hours packing. She took standard medical equipment, but also filled several boxes with basic supplies. Bandages, different types of medical tape, sealants, and anything else she could think of. In emergency medicine, you learned to work with whatever you had. As she packed the last box, she looked out the station's window at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire species was counting on her. She didn't know if she could help them, but she was determined to try. Sometimes the craziest ideas work best, she said to herself, adding a few extra rolls of medical tape to her supplies. And sometimes being too careful means missing a chance to do real good. 6 hours later, Hansol was on the transport ship, watching the space station get smaller behind her. She had no idea what she would find when she reached the Nexus world. But she knew one thing. She wouldn't give up until she had tried everything possible to help them. The ship's engines hummed as it accelerated to full speed. Ahead of her lay a 2-week journey and the biggest medical challenge of her life. But Hansol Park was ready to face it, armed with determination, medical knowledge, and a whole lot of tape. The medical transport ship landed on the Nexus homeworld after 2 weeks of space travel. Dr. Hansol Park looked out the window at a landscape that seemed made entirely of crystal. Tall buildings sparkled in the light of two suns, their surfaces reflecting rainbow colors everywhere. A small group waited near the landing pad. Among them stood a human woman in formal clothing. As Hansol walked down the ship's ramp, the woman stepped forward. "Dr. Park, welcome to Crystal City. I'm Ambassador Raiwan Lee," she said, extending her hand. "I've been living here for 3 years as the human representative." Hansol shook her hand, noticing how tired the ambassador looked. "How bad is the situation?" "It's worse than we thought," Raiwan said quietly. "Follow me. You need to see this." They walked to a nearby building that served as a medical center. Inside, Hansol saw something that made her stop in shock. Dozens of Nexus were lying on special crystal beds, but their bodies, which should have been smooth and clear like perfect diamonds, were cracking and turning dull. A tall Nexus in a white covering approached them. Their crystal body had a slight blue tint, though parts of it were becoming cloudy. "I am Do-Yun Kim, lead scientist here," they said through a translator device. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Park." Hansol watched as small pieces of crystal fell from a nearby patient. "How many are affected?" "All of us," Do-Yun replied. "It starts slowly. First, our outer layers become cloudy. Then the cracks appear. Finally, our bodies begin to crumble." They held up their own arm, showing hairline cracks starting to form. "We have perhaps 3 months before our civilization begins to fall apart completely." Hansol moved closer to examine one of the patients. She had studied everything available about Nexus biology during her journey, but seeing it in person was different. Their crystal structures were incredibly complex, more like living gems than simple minerals. "May I?" she asked, holding up a medical scanner. When Do-Yun nodded, she began taking readings of the affected areas. Ambassador Raiwan watched nearby. "Our best scientists have been trying to find a solution for months. Nothing has worked." Hansol frowned at her scanner readings. Something about the degradation pattern looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "Do-Yun, can you show me your research data?" The Nexus scientist led them to a laboratory filled with crystal computers. As they walked, Hansol noticed more signs of the problem. Every Nexus they passed showed some stage of the condition. Some had only slight clouding, while others had deep cracks running through their bodies. Do-Yun displayed their research on a large screen. Hansol studied the complex patterns of molecular breakdown. Suddenly, she remembered why it looked familiar. "This reminds me of certain bone diseases in humans," she said, pointing to specific patterns. "When the body's natural binding mechanisms start to fail." "But we are not made of bone," Do-Yun said, their body flickering with a color that Hansol guessed meant confusion. "No, but the principle might be similar," Hansol replied. She turned to Ambassador Raiwan. "Has anything in their environment changed recently? Anything at all?" Raiwan thought for a moment. Their third sun went supernova about a year ago. It was far enough away that the explosion didn't harm them directly, but it changed the radiation patterns in this system. Hansol's eyes widened. "Do-Yun, could that change in radiation be affecting your natural molecular bonding processes?" The crystal scientist's body pulsed with a bright color. "We hadn't considered that. We were looking for a disease, a virus, or an attack. But if our natural binding mechanism is failing due to environmental changes, then we don't need to cure a disease," Hansol finished. "We need to find a way to help hold you together until your bodies can adapt to the new conditions." She looked at her medical supplies, thinking about the boxes of basic materials she had brought. Sometimes the simplest solutions worked best in emergency medicine. If their natural glue was failing, maybe they just needed an artificial replacement. But first, she needed to understand exactly how their molecular structure worked. "Do-Yun, can you show me everything you have about normal Nexus molecular bonding? Every detail might be important." The scientist nodded, their crystal bodies shimmering with what might have been hope. As they pulled up more data, Hansol prepared herself for long hours of study. She had come too far to give up now, and an entire species was counting on her to find a solution. Dr. Hansol Park had been studying Nexus biology for 3 days straight. She sat in the crystal laboratory, surrounded by data screens and medical equipment. Her eyes were tired from looking at endless molecular patterns, but she couldn't stop. Time was running out. Du-Yun, Kim worked beside her, their crystal body now showing more cracks than before. They had been helping Hansol understand how healthy Nexus bodies maintain their structure. On a nearby table lay various failed treatment attempts from previous months. "Show me the molecular binding process again," Hansol said, rubbing her eyes. "But this time, slow it down." Du-Yun adjusted the crystal display. It showed how Nexus molecules naturally held together, creating their strong but flexible crystal bodies. Hansol watched carefully, thinking about similar processes in human medicine. Suddenly, she sat up straight. "Wait. Go back. Show that part again." The display rewound. Hansol leaned closer, her heart beating faster. She was seeing something familiar, something she had seen hundreds of times in emergency medicine. "Du-Yun," she said slowly, "your bodies create natural binding agents, correct? Like organic glue that holds your crystal structure together." "Yes," Du-Yun replied. "But that process is failing now. The new radiation has changed how our bodies make these binding agents." Hansol stood up and walked to her medical supplies. She opened a box and pulled out some medical tape and surgical adhesive. On Earth, when someone's body can't heal properly on its own, we sometimes help it along with artificial support. She held up the medical tape. "We use special adhesives to hold wounds together while they heal. What if we could create something similar for your people? Not to fix the problem permanently, but to hold you together while your bodies adapt to the new environment." Du-Yun's body flickered with interest. "But our crystal structure is very different from human flesh." "Yes, but the principle is the same," Hansol said, getting excited. "Your natural molecular bonds are weakening. You need something to support them until they can adjust to the new radiation levels." She grabbed her tablet and started making calculations. "We would need to modify the adhesive, of course. Add elements that work with your crystal structure. But if we could create a temporary binding agent." Ambassador Raiwan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Are you suggesting we literally tape them back together?" "In a way, yes," Hansol replied. "But with a specially designed medical adhesive that works with their biology. Think of it like a cast for a broken bone. It holds everything in place while healing happens." She turned to Du-Yun. "Your people's bodies are trying to adapt to the new environment. They just need time. If we can stop the degradation temporarily, it might give you that time." Du-Yun studied the medical supplies with new interest. "Our previous attempts at treatment were all focused on stopping the radiation effects or finding a cure. We never considered a temporary support solution." Hansol nodded eagerly. "Sometimes in emergency medicine, you don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to stabilize the patient long enough for their body to heal itself." She spread out her medical supplies on the table. "We'll need to run tests. Find the right combination of materials that works with your crystal structure. It might take several attempts, but it could work." Du-Yun finished, their body glowing with a color that definitely meant hope this time. Hansol picked up a piece of medical tape, studying it thoughtfully. "We'll start with understanding how different adhesives interact with your crystal structure. Then we can modify them to work better." She looked at the nearby patients, their bodies slowly crumbling. "We don't need a perfect solution right now. We just need something that will buy us time." Ambassador Raiwan smiled for the first time in days. "I'll inform the Nexus Council immediately. They'll want to hear about this." As Raiwan left the laboratory, Hansol turned back to her work with renewed energy. The solution might seem strange, even ridiculous, but she had learned long ago not to ignore an idea just because it seemed too simple. Sometimes the best answers were the unexpected ones. The Nexus Council chamber was filled with crystalline beings of various colors and sizes. Most of them showed signs of the degradation that threatened their species. Dr. Hansol Park stood before them, feeling nervous but determined. Council leader Jai-Ho Choi spoke first, their crystal form showing advanced signs of cracking. Dr. Park, Ambassador Lee tells us you have a possible solution. Please explain. Hansol took a deep breath and held up a roll of medical tape. This is a basic medical supply we use on Earth. We're going to modify it to help your people. A murmur went through the council. Several members flickered with colors that suggested disbelief or confusion. You propose to save our civilization with adhesive tape? One council member asked, their voice translated with a tone of skepticism. Not exactly, Hansol replied. We're going to create a special medical binding agent, using earth tape as a base, but we'll modify it to work with your crystal biology. She gestured to Do-Yun Kim, who stepped forward with their research data. Your bodies are trying to adapt to the new radiation from the supernova. They just need time. This solution will hold you together until that adaptation happens. A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. I can help with that. A Nexus with a slight green tint stepped forward. I am Mei Kang, engineering specialist. I understand how to work with both crystal and organic materials. Hansol smiled gratefully. Perfect. We'll need to create something flexible enough to move with your bodies, but strong enough to hold your crystal structure together. Mei moved to a nearby console and brought up technical diagrams. We can use the molecular structure of your medical tape as a starting point, then add crystal compounds that match our biology. Hansol nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. We'll need to run tests to find the right combination, but I think we can make it work. Council leader Jai-Ho raised a crystalline hand, causing small fragments to fall from their arm. How long will it take to develop this solution? Our people are crumbling more each day. With Mei's help, we can start testing immediately, Hansol said. We brought enough basic supplies to begin production once we find the right formula. She projected images showing her proposed treatment method. The modified adhesive will be applied in strips along the main stress points of your crystal structure. It will work like a flexible cast, holding everything together while your bodies adjust. Mei added, we can use our crystal processing facilities to manufacture the modified adhesive once we perfect it. We already have the necessary equipment. Several council members began speaking at once, their bodies flickering with various colors. Jai-Ho raised their hand for silence. This is... Jai-Ho paused, searching for the right words. An unusual solution. But we are in an unusual crisis. Dr. Park, you have our permission to proceed. Hansol bowed slightly. Thank you. Mei, Do-Yun, let's get to work. We'll need a testing lab and samples of different crystal compositions. As they left the council chamber, Ambassador Raiwan caught up with them. That went better than expected, though I think some of them still can't believe we're going to solve this with modified tape. Hansol smiled as they walked to the laboratory. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Now we just have to make it work. In the lab, Mei was already setting up testing equipment. I have some ideas for the first prototype. We can start with your medical tape and add crystalline compounds gradually until we find the right mix. Hansol looked at her supplies, then at her new team. The solution might sound crazy, but she had a good feeling about it. Sometimes the best medical breakthroughs came from thinking differently about simple things. Let's begin, she said, opening her medical kit. We have a civilization to save. The first week of testing did not go well. Dr. Hansol Park watched as another prototype adhesive strip dissolved when it touched the Nexus test crystal. This was the 15th failed attempt. The molecular binding is still not right, Mei Kang said, their crystal form dimming with disappointment. They had been working non-stop in the laboratory, trying different combinations of materials. Hansol made notes on her tablet. The adhesive is too strong. It's disrupting the crystal structure instead of supporting it. She looked at the failed test samples lined up on the laboratory table. Each one represented hours of work. A new voice came from the laboratory entrance. Perhaps I can help. A nexus with a purple tint entered the room. I am Tae-Yum Park, biochemist. I specialize in crystal organic interactions. Hansol welcomed the new help gladly. They needed all the expertise they could get. Time was running out. More nexus were reaching critical stages of degradation each day. Look at this, Tae-Young said, moving to the testing station. They displayed a complex molecular diagram. We're approaching this from the wrong direction. Instead of making the adhesive stronger, we should make it more flexible. Maire's crystal form brightened, like our natural binding process. Exactly, Tae-Yum replied. Our bodies don't use rigid bonds. They use flexible ones that can move and adapt. Hansol picked up a piece of medical tape, thinking hard. What if we combine different types of adhesive? Use one layer for strength and another for flexibility. The three of them worked through the night, creating new prototypes. They tested different combinations of Earth medical supplies and Nexus crystal compounds. Most failed, but each failure taught them something new. Try this one, Hansol said, holding up a modified strip of tape. They had added crystal particles to the adhesive and changed its molecular structure. The strip seemed to shimmer slightly, like Nexus skin. Mireille carefully applied it to a cracking crystal sample. Everyone held their breath, watching. The adhesive spread smoothly, forming a thin, flexible layer. After 10 minutes, the crystal was still stable. It's working, Tae-Young said, their body glowing brightly. The crystal structure is accepting the support. Hansol quickly checked the readings. The degradation has stopped in the test area. And look, the crystal seems to be starting to heal around the edges. They tested the new adhesive for hours, making sure it was safe. Each test showed the same results. The modified tape stopped the degradation and allowed the crystal structure to slowly strengthen itself. We need to test it on a living subject, Mary said finally. All our sample tests look good, but a real Nexus body is more complex. Hansol nodded seriously. Who wants to volunteer? I will, said Do-Yum Kim from the doorway. They had been monitoring the team's progress. Their body showed severe cracking now, with small pieces falling away regularly. I trust your work, Dr. Park. The room fell silent as Hansol prepared the modified adhesive strips. She worked carefully, applying them to the worst cracks in Do-Yun's crystal form. The transparent strips barely showed against Do-Yun's surface. How does it feel? Hansol asked anxiously. Do-Yun moved slowly, testing their range of motion. It feels supporting, like when our bodies were healthy. They held up their arm, examining it. The crumbling has stopped. Everyone crowded around to check the readings. The degradation had completely halted where the modified tape was applied. More importantly, Do-Yun's natural crystal structure seemed to be strengthening around the treated areas. We did it, Hansol whispered, hardly daring to believe it. We actually did it. But there was no time to celebrate. They had found a solution, but now they faced an even bigger challenge. They needed to make enough of it to save an entire civilization. The success of the modified adhesive brought new challenges. Dr. Hansol Park stood in the main production facility of Crystal City, looking at the massive manufacturing equipment. They needed to make enough of the special tape to treat millions of Nexus, and they needed to do it quickly. Our biggest problem is scale, said Yu-Jin Nam, the facility's production specialist. Their crystal form flickered with concern as they studied the manufacturing plans. We can make the adhesive, but not fast enough. Hansol checked her tablet, showing the latest reports. More Nexus were reaching critical stages of degradation every hour. The successful treatment of Do-Yum Kim had given everyone hope, but that hope would mean nothing if they couldn't produce enough of the treatment. What if we convert all manufacturing lines to produce the adhesive? Ambassador Raiwan suggested. The council has approved emergency measures. Yu-Jin's crystal form brightened. Yes, we could modify all our crystal processing equipment, but we'll need more raw materials from Earth. Han Sol immediately contacted the International Space Station Medical Bay. This is Dr. Park. We need emergency supplies. Send everything you have. Medical tape, surgical adhesives, binding compounds, send it all. While they waited for the supplies, Yu Jin's team worked to convert the manufacturing facility. They modified crystal growing chambers into adhesive processors. They transformed mineral refiners into molecular binding units. The entire facility changed its purpose, becoming a massive medical supply production center. The first Earth supply ship has arrived, Rai-1 announced 3 days later. More ships were already on their way, bringing materials from hospitals and medical centers across Earth. Han Sol organized teams to unload the supplies and feed them into the production lines. The facility ran day and night, producing long sheets of the modified adhesive. Each batch was tested to ensure it matched the exact specifications they had developed. We're producing enough for 1,000 treatments per day, Yu Jin reported after the first week. But we need to do better. They found ways to speed up production. Meirui Kang discovered how to make the process more efficient. Taeyum Park improved the formula to use fewer raw materials. Everyone worked together, knowing that lives depended on their success. But problems kept appearing. Some batches of adhesive didn't bond correctly. Others dried too quickly. Each problem had to be solved without slowing down production. The molecular stability is dropping in the newest batches, Taeyung reported one evening. The crystal compounds aren't mixing properly. Han Sol studied the production line, remembering something from her emergency medicine training. What if we cool the mixture more gradually? Like how we treat thermal injuries, slow, controlled temperature changes. The suggestion worked. The new process created more stable batches, and production speed increased. Soon, they were making enough adhesive to treat 5,000 nexus per day. We're starting to catch up with the need, Yu Jin said, checking the latest numbers. But we're seeing different types of crystal degradation now. Some nexus need slightly different formulas. Han Sol had noticed this too. We'll need to create variations of the adhesive, different formulas for different crystal types. They modified the production lines again, creating separate streams for different adhesive types. It made everything more complicated, but they had no choice. Every nexus life mattered. As Han Sol watched the production lines running at full speed, she felt proud of what they had accomplished. They had taken a simple medical supply and turned it into something that could save an entire civilization. But their work wasn't finished yet. They still had millions of nexus to treat, and time was still their enemy. The main medical center of Crystal City had been transformed into a treatment facility. Long lines of nexus waited patiently for their turn, their crystal bodies showing various stages of degradation. Dr. Han Sol Park watched as medical teams worked efficiently to apply the modified adhesive strips. Chief Healer Sung Min Oh supervised the treatment teams. They had quickly learned the proper application techniques that Han Sol had developed. We are treating 500 patients per day in this facility alone, they reported. Similar numbers in other centers across the planet. Han Sol moved among the treatment stations, checking the work. Each nexus needed a slightly different approach, depending on their crystal type and the severity of their degradation. The medical teams had to be precise in their work. Remember to check the crystal structure before applying the adhesive, she instructed a group of new healers. The placement must follow the natural growth patterns. She demonstrated the technique on a volunteer, carefully applying the modified tape along the crystal's press lines. The results were encouraging. Treated nexus showed immediate stabilization. More importantly, follow-up examinations revealed signs of natural regeneration around the treated areas. Their bodies were slowly adapting to the new radiation environment, just as Han Sol had hoped. Ambassador Rai-1 brought more good news. The spaceports report that supply ships from Earth are arriving daily now. Medical centers across your world have donated their supplies. Han Sol felt touched by Earth's response. When word had spread about the crisis, hospitals and medical facilities had sent whatever they could spare. Humanity had united to help save another species. A young Nexus approached Hansol, their crystal form barely holding together. "Will this really help me?" they asked quietly. Their voice translation revealed fear and hope mixed together. "Yes," Hansol answered confidently. "Look at Du Yun." She pointed to her friend and colleague, who was helping treat other patients. Du Yun's crystal form had stabilized completely, and new growth was visible where the worst cracks had been. The treatment process was simple but needed careful attention. First, the medical teams cleaned the degraded areas. Then they applied the correct type of modified adhesive, matching it to the patient's specific crystal structure. Finally, they checked to make sure the bonding was successful. The hardest cases are responding well, some men reported, showing Hansol their medical records. Even those we thought were too far gone are showing signs of recovery. The treatment centers operated around the clock. As more Nexus were treated, they often stayed to help others. The medical centers became places of hope and healing, filled with the shimmer of crystal bodies starting to regain their natural glow. Hansol worked alongside the Nexus healers, teaching and learning at the same time. She discovered that each crystal type had its own patterns, its own way of accepting the treatment. This knowledge helped them refine their techniques further. "You have given us more than medicine," some men said one evening, as they watched treated patients leave the facility. "You have given us hope. You have shown us that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most powerful." Hansol smiled, watching a group of recently treated children playing nearby, their crystal forms already showing signs of recovery. Sometimes being a doctor means thinking differently about problems, and sometimes it means trusting that even simple things, like medical tape, can make a big difference. The treatment centers continued their work day and night. One by one, the Nexus people were being saved, their civilization pulling back from the brink of extinction. And it all started with a human doctor who refused to give up, armed with determination and a simple roll of tape. 3 months had passed since the first treatment. Dr. Hansol Park stood at the window of the Crystal City Medical Center, watching the sunset reflect off the restored crystal buildings. The view was different now. The Nexus people were regaining their natural shine and strength. "The latest medical reports are very encouraging," Ambassador Raiwan said, joining her at the window. She handed Hansol a tablet showing the recovery statistics. Over 90% of the population has been treated successfully. The rest will be completed within 2 weeks. Hansol studied the numbers with satisfaction. The crisis that had threatened to destroy an entire civilization was ending. But more importantly, the Nexus bodies were adapting to their changed environment, just as she had hoped. "Look at this," Du Yun Kim said, approaching them. Their crystal form now shone with perfect clarity, all signs of degradation gone. They displayed a molecular scan on their datapad. "Our bodies are developing natural resistance to the new radiation. The modified adhesive gave us the time we needed to adapt." The council had called a special meeting to discuss the future. Hansol stood once again in the great crystal chamber, but this time the atmosphere was very different. Council leader Jaiho Choi, their form now strong and clear, addressed the gathering. "Dr. Park," they said, their voice translation carrying warmth, "you came to us when others would not. You found a solution when we thought none existed. The Nexus people will never forget this." Jaiho approached Hansol, holding a crystal sculpture. "This is our highest civilian honor. But more than this, we wish to establish something lasting. We are creating a permanent human medical research facility here on our world." Hansol accepted the award with surprise. "Thank you, but I didn't do this alone. This was a team effort, humans and Nexus working together." "Yes," Jaiho agreed. "And that is why the new facility will be a place where both our peoples can work together. We have much to learn from each other." The new medical research center would be built near the original treatment facility. It would include laboratories, teaching spaces, and research areas, where human and Nexus medical experts could work together. Will you help us set it up? Sung Min O asked Hansol. We want to explore more ways to combine human and Nexus medical knowledge. Hansol smiled. I would be honored. But first, I need to write up everything we learned here. Other doctors need to know that sometimes the simplest solutions can solve the biggest problems. That evening, Hansol walked through Crystal City one last time before her return trip to Earth. The streets were full of healthy Nexus going about their lives, their crystal forms glowing with renewed strength. Children played in the parks, their bodies sparkling in the light of the twin suns. You know what amazes me most? Raiwan said as they walked. Not just that you saved them, but how you did it. You showed us that creativity and determination can be more powerful than the most advanced technology. Hansol watched a group of young Nexus playing nearby. One had a small scratch and was showing their friend how to apply a regular medical patch. They had learned well from the human doctors. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that seem too simple to work, Hansol replied. We just have to be willing to try them. As she prepared to board the ship back to Earth, Hansol took one last look at the crystal world she had helped save. The medical research facility would ensure that humans and Nexus would continue to work together, learning from each other and growing stronger together. And somewhere in the medical center, in a special display case, sat a simple roll of Earth medical tape, a reminder that even the smallest things could change the course of history.